Throughout history, kings and queens have risen and fallen. Empires have been built and destroyed. Yet, amidst all the wars, revolutions, and upheavals, one thing has remained: the regalia, the crowns, orbs, and scepters that symbolize power, faith, and destiny. These jewels are not mere ornaments. They are the language of monarchy, forged in gold and encrusted with gemstones, carrying stories of battles won, kingdoms lost, and dynasties restored. To wear a crown was to declare, "I am chosen. I rule by divine right." From the glittering halls of London to the treasuries of Vienna, from the coronation rituals of Denmark to the holy relics of Hungary, Europe's crown jewels whisper of glory, survival, and memory. This is the untold story of Europe's regalia, their secrets, their survival, and their eternal message. The crown endures. Before crowns glittered with diamonds and scepters gleamed with gold, regalia began as sacred relics of faith. Early kings believed their authority flowed from God, and the Church guarded that power. A fragment of the true cross, a saint's bone, or a holy chalice, these were the first treasures of sovereignty. To touch them was to bind one's rule to the divine. When Charlemagne was crowned emperor in the year 800, his golden crown became the most powerful symbol in Europe. It was not simply a jewel, it was a declaration that kings ruled by God's command. From that moment, regalia became inseparable from power, treasured not only for beauty but for the authority they bestowed. The making of regalia was an art of devotion. Goldsmiths, jewelers, and monks labored for months, even years, to craft a single crown. Every gem was chosen for meaning: sapphires for heaven, emeralds for rebirth, and pearls for purity. The result was not just treasury, it was a holy object, a bridge between heaven and earth. Coronation was more than a ceremony. It was a transformation. A man became a king not by blood alone, but by wearing the regalia. The crown symbolized divine approval, the scepter authority over law, and the orb mastery of the world under God. Without them, a ruler's legitimacy stood in question. With them, he stood as chosen. To possess the crown was to possess the kingdom. Rival monarchs fought wars not only for land, but for regalia. Whoever held the sacred objects claimed the right to rule. From the very beginning, Europe's history was not just a struggle for throne, as it was a struggle for the jewels that made a king. In the Middle Ages, relics were the holiest treasures of Christendom. A fragment of the true cross or thorn from Christ's crown carried unimaginable spiritual power. Kings and emperors guarded these relics within golden reliquaries, believing they were divine guarantees of their rule. To wear regalia containing relics was to rule not only by blood, but by heaven's grace. The Church gifted kings relics as signs of divine favor. A jewel from Jerusalem, a chalice from Rome, or a saint's relic from Constantinople each strengthened the bond between throne and altar. These gifts were not mere ornaments, they were tokens of sacred legitimacy, binding monarchy to the eternal authority of the Church. Before battles, kings carried holy relics into war. Soldiers believed these treasures ensured victory, for God's blessing was said to march with them. The regalia became more than symbols of rule, they were weapons of faith. To see a king raise a relic high on the battlefield was to believe heaven itself had taken sides. By the 10th century, regalia became inseparable from relics. Crowns were set with gemstones said to protect kings from evil. Scepters held fragments of saints' bones. Even swords bore inscriptions of holy verses. Every coronation became a sacred act, binding monarchy to God through relics crafted into regalia. The deeper the link between relics and regalia, the stronger a king's authority became. His enemies could seize his throne, but without the relics, their claim was fragile. To wear relic-filled regalia was to say, "I am chosen by God." Without them, a ruler was just a man with a crown. The crown was the ultimate symbol of monarchy. Unlike a sword or scepter, which showed authority in action, the crown signified transformation. Of the moment when a mortal man became a king. To place a crown on one's head was to accept not only earthly power, but divine responsibility. Its very shape, a circle with no end, reflected eternity, reminding rulers that their authority was bound to the eternal order of heaven. Yet every crown told a unique story. Some were forged from ancient gold, passed from one dynasty to another, carrying the weight of centuries. Others were crafted anew, designed to declare the glory of an ambitious king or queen. No matter the origin, Each crown was more than ornamenta, it was the visible sign of legitimacy, a sacred badge that even rivals could not ignore. To see a king without a crown was to see a ruler stripped of authority, but with it, his very presence commanded all obedience. The gems of a crown were chosen with purpose, each carrying meaning that went beyond beauty. Sapphires represented the heavens, emeralds symbolized rebirth and strength, rubies stood for courage and passion, and pearls reflected purity. To wear such a crown was to wear the virtues expected of a ruler. But crowns also carried secrets of conquest. Many jewels within them were spoils of war, taken from defeated enemies or brought home from distant crusades. The crown was thus both holy and worldly, a mixture of sacred blessing and political victory. A king who wore it reminded all that his rule was protected by God, and his enemies had already fallen at his feet. The dazzling brilliance of crowns was not only to impress, it was to intimidate, to leave no doubt that the ruler before you was chosen and untouchable. Coronation ceremonies revealed the true power of crowns. In that sacred moment, a monarch was lifted above ordinary men and bound to the divine order. Bishops placed the crown with holy prayers, while nobles pledged loyalty upon their knees. The people did not merely see a ruler, they witnessed a covenant between God, king, and kingdom. Every gesture, every word in the ceremony reinforced the crown's sacred role. When the crown was raised above the monarch's head, it was not simply to adorn, it was to transform, and when it descended, the ruler became a living symbol of continuity, carrying forward centuries of tradition. Long after the prayers ended, the memory of the crown upon a king's head lived on in chronicles, paintings, and the hearts of subjects who believed they had seen divine authority made flesh. The loss of a crown was a catastrophe. To capture an enemy king's crown was to shatter his legitimacy, to claim victory not only over his army but over his divine right to rule. Many battles in medieval Europe were remembered not for the blood spilled, but for the fate of the regalia. A crown abandoned on the battlefield symbolized defeat, while one held aloft by the victor signaled triumph ordained by heaven. But crowns were resilient symbols. Even when lost, destroyed, or stolen, new crowns rose from the ashes. Monarchs understood that their power could not survive long without one. The making of a crown was an act of renewal, a statement that the monarchy itself endured, no matter how many thrones were shaken by war. In this way, the crown was eternally shining even through the darkest chapters of Europe's history. Every nation crafted its own crown, yet all served the same purpose: to embody power. The Holy Roman Imperial crown declared the emperor as God's chosen ruler over Christendom. The fleur-de-lis crown of France tied the monarchy to St. Louis and the sacred mission of Catholic kingship. In Russia, the double-domed crowns proclaimed the czars as heirs of both Rome and Byzantium. Though each crown was distinct in shape, style, and jewel, they all shared a universal language. To wear one was to step into a role larger than life, to become not just a leader, but the living embodiment of a nation's destiny. The crowns of Europe were more than gold, they were the very soul of monarchy, binding rulers to the past while projecting authority into the future. If the crown marked divine favor, the scepter and orb expressed divine authority in action. The scepter, long and commanding, was the king's staff of justice, his power to rule, judge, and protect his people. Topped with a cross or a fleur-de-lis, it reminded all that this authority flowed from God, not ambition. The orb, a golden sphere often adorned with a cross, symbolized dominion over the world. To hold it was to declare that a monarch's rule stood at the center of order, beneath heaven and above earthly chaos. Together, the scepter and orb were not mere accessories, they were lessons in monarchy, a visual language that every subject could understand. To see a king hold them was to know his reign had both authority and legitimacy, both strength and sanctity. The making of scepters and orbs was as symbolic as it was artistic. Craftsmen worked under strict guidance from the church, ensuring that every detail carried spiritual meaning. A scepter shaft might bear inscriptions from the Psalms, invoking divine justice. An orb might contain a relic at its core, linking the ruler's dominion to the sacred. Gems were chosen with purpose. Diamonds signified invincibility, emeralds eternal life, and rubies divine fire. When the finished regalia was presented to the king, it was not just a gift of beauty, it was a sacred tool. With it, he could preside over law, deliver justice, and embody order itself. Subjects did not simply see gold and gems as they saw symbols of a higher truth, crafted by human hands but sanctioned by heaven. The moment when a king received the scepter and orb was central to coronation. As bishops handed them over, they declared the meaning of each, the scepter as a sign of righteous leadership, the orb as a sign of dominion under Christ. When the king raised them high before his people, he was no longer simply a ruler, he was the guardian of justice and the keeper of divine order. This symbolism was understood by all, even peasants in the crowd, who might never touch gold or jewels, knew the language of regalia. To see their king with scepter and orb was to know that law would be upheld, and that their land stood secure under heaven's gaze. The regalia was theater, yes, but theater with sacred power, binding ruler and ruled in a covenant of faith and order. In times of war, scepters and orbs carried powerful messages. A king who appeared with them after battle declared not just military triumph, but divine sanction of victory. His soldiers saw in the scepter the justice of their cause, and in the orb the promise that their ruler's dominion would extend and endure. To enemies, these symbols were terrifying, for they understood that to fight such a king was not only to oppose a man but to defy heaven's will. Thus regalia was more than ceremonial, it was psychological. It shaped loyalty, projected fear, and elevated a monarch's authority above the battlefield. Victory was not simply claimed with swords, it was sealed with symbols. Across Europe, every monarchy crafted its own scepters and orbs, yet their message remained universal. In England, the scepter with the cross and the scepter with the dove expressed both kingly authority and spiritual peace. In France, scepters adorned with fleur-de-lis tied rulers to their ancient heritage. In the Holy Roman Empire, the orb bore a cross that proclaimed the emperor Lord of Christendom. Though each piece reflected local traditions, together they spoke the same language: authority rooted in faith, dominion upheld by justice, and monarchy bound to heaven. For centuries, scepters and orbs reminded both rulers and subjects that kingship was not merely political, it was sacred. They were the instruments of rule, as essential as the crown itself. Not every piece of royal regalia survived the storms of history. Wars, revolutions, and betrayals claimed many treasures that once crowned Europe's greatest monarchs. For every crown that still gleams in a museum today, there are others that vanished into fire, were melted for coin, or stolen in the chaos of rebellion. The loss of regalia was more than the destruction of wealth, it was the tearing away of a nation's identity. Without its sacred objects, a monarchy stood vulnerable, stripped of the divine order that made kings more than men. The most infamous destruction of regalia came during the French Revolution. In 1793, revolutionaries stormed the royal treasury, declaring crowns and scepters symbols of tyranny. Jewels were torn from gold, melted, and sold to fund the Republic. The magnificent fleur-de-lis crowns of France, once worn by kings anointed with holy oil, were smashed into history's dust. Only fragments, sketches, and scattered gems survived. For France, the revolution was not only the death of a king, it was the deliberate erasure of monarchy's sacred language. England too felt the loss of its treasures. After King Charles I was executed in 1649, Parliament declared the monarchy abolished. The regalia, symbols of divine kingship, were condemned. Gold was melted into coins, and jewels were sold to merchants. For the first time in centuries, the English crown disappeared. Yet history turned once more. When Charles II returned to the throne in 1660, a new set of regalia was Frigida crowns, scepters, and orbs reborn to restore the monarchy's grandeur. In this rebirth, England's monarchy declared, "Kings may die, but the crown itself endures." Some regalia were lost not in revolutions, but in war. In the chaos of battle, crowns and scepters were looted, carried off as trophies by victorious armies or stolen by opportunists in the night. Many vanished into private collections or were melted down, their origins forgotten. Yet rumors persisted, stories of crowns hidden in monasteries, jewels buried beneath castles, or relics smuggled across borders to keep them safe. These lost regalia became legends, fueling generations of treasure hunters and historians who still search for what was stolen centuries ago. The lost regalia of Europe remind us how fragile symbols of power can be. What took years to craft could be destroyed in a single night of fury. Yet even in their absence, These vanished treasures still hold power. They live on in chronicles, paintings, and memory. Their destruction did not erase their meaning, it magnified it, turning them into legends. Every crown that survives today carries not only its own story, but also the silent echoes of those that were lost. Together, they speak of monarchy's resilience, and of history's relentless cycle of glory and ruin. Not all regalia were lost. Some survived only because monarchs and loyalists risked everything to protect them. In times of war or revolution, royal treasuries became battlegrounds in themselves. Chests of regalia were hidden in monasteries, smuggled to foreign allies, or buried beneath castles. These objects were too important to be treated as mere valuables if they were the very heart of monarchy. To lose them was to lose legitimacy. To save them was to save a kingdom's soul. One of the most remarkable survival stories comes from Hungary. The crown of Saint Stephen, the sacred symbol of Hungarian kingship, was so revered that when foreign invaders threatened, it was hidden away countless times, buried, stolen, recovered, and even smuggled across Europe. For Hungarians, this crown was more than a royal treasure, it was the embodiment of their nation. To safeguard it was to safeguard Hungary itself. Such efforts remind us that regalia were never just artifacts of power. They were living symbols, so essential to monarchy that men risked their lives to protect them. In the darkest of times, kings and their loyal followers understood, so long as the regalia survived, the monarchy itself might rise again. The survival of regalia was not just a medieval story, it continued into the modern age. During World War II, Britain faced the threat of Nazi invasion. The German Luftwaffe bombed London relentlessly, and there were real fears that Hitler might seize or destroy the crown jewels if he conquered Britain. To protect them, the jewels were secretly removed from the Tower of London and hidden deep in the vaults of Windsor Castle. Only a handful of people knew the truth. The jewels were placed in lead-lined boxes and buried under stone floors, ready to be retrieved if disaster struck. Even King George VI was said to have been kept in partial ignorance. The secrecy so tight that only trusted curators and a few royals knew the jewels' exact location. Thanks to this vigilance, the regalia survived the most devastating war in modern history. Today, visitors to the Tower of London see them glittering under glass, but few realize that, not so long ago, their survival hung by a thread. Throughout history, monasteries became sanctuaries for regalia. When kingdoms fell into civil war, loyal bishops and abbots took responsibility for hiding crowns, scepters, and relics. They believed that safeguarding regalia was not only political, but a holy duty. In the Holy Roman Empire, several times during invasions, the imperial crown and sacred relics were rushed out of treasuries and carried to remote monasteries, hidden in cathedrals, or spirited into mountain strongholds. Monks risked their lives to protect these treasures, knowing that their loss would mean not only the end of an emperor's reign but the very collapse of Christendom's symbolic order. These acts of guardianship were never forgotten. Generations of chroniclers wrote of the monks who carried crowns through snowstorms, or who bricked relics into hidden chapels. Thanks to such bravery, many of the treasures we admire today still exist. Without these men of faith, Europe's regalia might have been scattered to ashes and memory. Time and again, the survival of regalia made the restoration of monarchy possible. When Charles II returned to England in 1660, it was not only his presence that mattered, but the forging of new regalia to replace what Cromwell had destroyed. Their survival, whether through recreation or preservation, gave legitimacy to his rule. For the people, to see the regalia was proof that monarchy had returned, sanctioned and unbroken. This story was not unique. Across Europe, whenever dynasties were restored after exile, the regalia, old or newly made, was paraded before the people as a sign of continuity. A crown was not simply metal and jewels, it was history itself, the promise that the kingdom's traditions had endured even through the storm. Thus, regalia became more than relics of the past. They were bridges between what was lost and what could be reclaimed. Without them, monarchies might have been forgotten. With them, rulers could declare, "The crown endures, and so does the nation." The survival of Europe's regalia is nothing short of miraculous. Through centuries of fire and blood, through invasions, revolutions, and world wars, many crowns, scepters, and orbs still shine before us today. Each bears scars of history, some repaired after damage, others missing jewels that once adorned them, yet their very survival gives them greater power. These treasures remind us that monarchy, though often shaken, was never erased. As long as the regalia survived, monarchs could rise again, dynasties could reclaim their thrones, and nations could remember who they were. The jewels and crowns are more than gold, they are survivors, witnesses to the resilience of tradition. Standing before them today, in glass cases or in ceremonial processions, we do not simply see objects of wealth, we see survivors of history, guardians of memory, and proof that symbols, once forged, can outlast kingdoms, revolutions, and even empires. In the Tower of London, behind thick glass and steel, rests the most famous crown in the world, St. Edward's crown, forged in 1661 for the coronation of Charles II. It is still used to crown British monarchs today. This crown alone weighs more than 2 kilograms of solid gold, set with 444 gemstones as sapphires, amethysts, garnets, and pearls. But its true weight lies not in the gold, but in the legacy it carries. When Elizabeth II wore it in 1953, the world watched as history seemed to step out of myth into modernity. And in 2023, when King Charles III was crowned, millions again saw the same ritual that had been performed for nearly 1,000 years. This continuity reminds us that crowns are more than relics, they are living links to the past, binding present rulers to their ancestors and to their people. St. Edward's crown is not just jewelry, it is a symbol that has survived wars, revolutions, and the test of time. It speaks not only of monarchy, but of resilience. The Hungarian crown of St. Stephen holds a place unlike any other in Europe, believed to date back nearly 1,000 years. It is more than a crown, it is considered a holy relic. For centuries, no Hungarian king was regarded as truly legitimate until this crown rested upon his head. Its survival is almost miraculous. Hidden, stolen, recovered, smuggled, and even entrusted to American forces during World War II, the crown endured every upheaval in Hungarian history. Today, it rests inside the Hungarian parliament, guarded day and night, a silent witness to the trials of a nation that would not let its identity die. For Hungarians, this crown is not merely a treasure, it is their soul, their unity, their endurance. Its story proves that regalia were not simply symbols of kings, they were symbols of nations themselves. In Vienna, the imperial crown of the Holy Roman Empire rests in silence, but its very form tells a story. Unlike most crowns, it is octagonal, set with ancient gems and Christian relics, symbolizing not only power but divine order. From the 10th century until Napoleon's rise, emperors of the Holy Roman Empire claimed their authority beneath its golden arches. This crown was never just for display, it was carried to coronations alongside the imperial sword and orb, symbols that the emperor ruled by God's command. For centuries, it represented the very heart of Europe, a fragmented continent bound together under one spiritual and political vision. Even after the empire dissolved in 1806, the crown survived, carefully preserved, revered as a relic of a vanished world. Today, it whispers to us of an age when crowns were not ornaments, but declarations of destiny. Not all European crowns remain locked behind glass. In Denmark, the regalia of the Danish kings, crowns, swords, scepters, and orbs are still used during ceremonies. The crown of King Christian V, made in the 17th century, remains a dazzling masterpiece of goldsmithing, adorned with diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires. Though Danish monarchs are no longer crowned in the traditional sense, the regalia still appear at state occasions, funerals, and moments of national transition. Their presence reminds the Danish people that monarchy is not only a political institution, it is a living tradition that binds past and present. Unlike jewels in a museum, these regalia continue to breathe with the rhythm of a nation, proving that the symbolism of crowns has not faded. Even in the modern age, a cinematic montage, crowns, orbs, and scepters from across Europe glowing together in golden light, with faint silhouettes of kings, queens, and warriors in the background, fading into eternity. Narration, A 3 minutes 8 closing, The crown jewels of Europe are more than treasures. They are witnesses to revolutions and restorations, guardians of faith and power, survivors of fire, theft, and war. They remind us that while kings and empires may rise and fall, symbols endure. Each crown tells a story, of rulers who believed they were chosen by God, of nations that refused to lose their identity, of people who risked their lives to protect symbols of unity. And though today many monarchs rule only in ceremony, the regalia they wear still command a proof that these objects still speak across centuries. As we leave this journey, one truth remains: the jewels may glitter with gold and gemstones, but their true value lies in the stories they carry. They are not just Europe's regalia, they are Europe's memory. And as long as crowns rest upon velvet cushions, gleaming under light, they will whisper the same eternal message: the crown endures. As we reach the end of this journey, we see that Europe's crown jewels are more than treasures. They are survivors of fire, war, and revolution. They are voices of tradition, speaking across centuries. They are symbols of unity and identity, carrying the weight of nations upon their golden arches. Though monarchs may fall and thrones may vanish, the regalia endure. They remind us that power is fleeting, but symbols are eternal. Each crown, scepter, and orb holds not just jewels, but memory, a proof that the past is never truly gone. So, as these crowns continue to shine under glass, in ceremonies, or upon royal heads, they whisper the same timeless truth: kings may die, empires may crumble, but the crown endures.